Welcome back. In part 1, we exposed the invisible structural shift in the constitution under federalism. We saw how UPSC moved from testing theoretical provisions to operational conflicts. Today, we step into the second half of the GS-2 paper, that is, Parliament, Governance, and Service Delivery. And let me warn you, the shift here is even more brutal. The vast majority of aspirants are still preparing for an exam that existed in 2014. They spend months memorizing the legislative stages of a bill. They blindly memorize thick booklets of government schemes, launch dates, and nodal ministries. But look at the actual papers from 2013 to 2025. UPSC has completely abandoned textbook trivia. Today we decode exactly what the examiner is looking for when they test how the Indian state functions on the ground. That is engine 3. In the part 1 we discussed about engine 1 and 2, that is constitution and federalism. This is engine 3, that is parliamentary scuttled scrutiny. What is this? Let us look at parliament and state legislatures in detail. The average student reads the standard textbooks and think that preparing for parliament means Lok Sabha versus Rajya Sabha powers. But that is not. Types of majorities, how a bill becomes law. Now look closely at the actual PYQs. The systematic bypassing of departmentally related standing committees. The normalization of the ordinance route. The absolute failure of the anti-defection law to prevent political instability. The steep decline in annual parliamentary sittings and productivity. Let me take one simple example, that is question. What is the examiner actually testing here? Procedural laws? No. The examiner is testing the erosion of legislative accountability. What? The erosion of legislative accountability. UPSC is not asking how does parliament work. UPSC is asking why is the executive consistently outmaneuvering the legislature? What UPSC is asking now? Why is the executive consistently outmaneuvering the legislature? For this, watch the classic student mistake like this. A question appears on the misuse of ordinance. The student immediately writes Article 123 meaning, President powers, President's power, names a famous cases, names a few famous cases, finished. That is the textbook answer. At that times have gone and it gets generic below average marks. An administrator looks at the institutional tension. Your answer structure must move from constitutional intent to executive convenience to the scuttling of parliamentary scrutiny and finally to institutional remediation. So, listen to the difference in the opening line. Do not write Article 123 gives the president power to promulgate ordinance. That is the week. That is the 2013 14 15 answer. You have to do right like this. The ordinance making power, originally designed as an emergency constitutional safety valve, has increasingly transformed into an executive convenience tool to bypass legislative scrutiny. This is this is the way you have to write an opening for this type of questions. Why executive bypassing the legislative procedure? Here, what is the legislative procedure? Regarding, we are talking about ordinance, that is the president's power as well as governance power, governor power. But under Article 123, it is president's power to promulgate ordinance. So you have to understand the question first. What is the hidden meaning? What is the question UPSC is asking? You have to identify the demand of the question. The ordinance making power, originally designed as an emergency constitutional safety valve, has increasingly transformed into an executive convenience tool to bypass legislative scrutiny. This should be the opening or introduction to the particular question regarding ordinance. So instantly the examiner knows, you understand the raw power dynamic between the organs of state, like executive and legislative. So preparation, what you have to prepare for the 2026 mains, the implication, what is the implication, what you have to prepare as far as GS2 is concerned for mains 2026. You have to stop reading parliament as a static rule book. That days has gone, that days have been gone. Read it as an active arena of executive accountability. Read it as an executive, reading it as an active arena of executive accountability. Then we are moving to the engine number 4, that is the outcome bias and welfare friction. Now let us dismantle the single biggest trap in the entire GS2 paper syllabus, that is governance and social justice. Every year coaching factor is print 1,000 pages complications, 1,000 page compilations of government schemes. Students blindly memorize the funding patterns, the target demographics, and the eligibility criteria. And then they enter the exam hall and get completely blindsided. Look at the PYQs. The examiner almost never asks you to list the features of a scheme. No, never ask like that. Instead, look at the wording of previous year's questions. Let me take one question, that is, performance of welfare schemes is fundamentally tied to community participation. Why do poverty alleviation programs fail to yield desired transformative results? This is what we call the outcome bias. UPSC is not primarily rewarding your ability to reproduce the ideal design of a policy sitting inside a ministry in Delhi. No, UPSC is not primarily rewarding your ability to reproduce the ideal design of a policy sitting inside a ministry in Delhi. No, UPSC rewards your ability to identify welfare friction. The exact points where a well designed policy begins to weaken during implementation and eventually breaks down on the ground. So, policy is design, delivery is friction, in, implementation is problem, breaks down in the ground, breaks down on the ground. Policy is a merely design, delivery is friction, and UPSC exclusively tests that friction only. Let me take one PYQ for your understanding. Let us prove this with an actual PYQ. That is the take this question. For example, let's say that is the question. Why do poverty alleviation programs fail to yield desired transformative results? This is the actual question. Please look carefully. What is the average student hearing? Student hears poverty, then government schemes, then list PMGKAY, then list MGNREGA, then write challenges and conclusion. That's it. Finished. But that is not what the examiner asking. What is the hidden demand? Hidden demand, not what programs exist, but they are asking why does policy success collapse during delivery? Even though policies are very well designed, but why collapse in the ground? Why collapse on the ground in the implementation? That changes everything. Normal answer like this, students write like this: lack of funds, then corruption, then infrastructure gaps, then awareness issues. This is looks like generic, predictable, low differentiation. But now watch the administrative structure here is what should be the actual topper opening. This is the opening of the topper writing an answer regarding this particular question. Despite extensive welfare expansion, transformative outcomes remain constrained due to systemic delivery frictions across institutional layers. What the opening says is, despite extensive welfare expansion, transformative outcomes remain constrained due to systemic delivery frictions where across institutional layers. This should be the opening of this particular question. Then after the opening, we are moving to the body. From the body, we are to three layers classified: macro, meso, and micro. Comes to the macro, funding delays and fragmented intergovernmental coordination. In the body, first and foremost, sentence as far as macro is concerned, funding delays and fragmented intergovernmental coordination. Then comes to the meso. rigid implementation architecture and poor local adaptation. This is the meso. And comes to the micro. Last mile exclusion, weak grievance systems, low citizen participation. This is the body, entire body from macro to micro. Then comes to the closure. This is also called as conclusion. That is, policy quality matters, but administrative execution determines outcomes. That is the difference between describing governance and diagnosing governance. This should be the closure. This should be the conclusion. Look at the structure of the answer. Look at the quality of the answer. Look at the demand of the question, and the answer should be match the demand of the question. Then only you get decent marks. Then what is the decoding delivery architecture here is, so how do you write an administrative answer that scores high when a policy fails? Like student doing these mistakes, the question asks why primary health care or education scheme is failing, etc. The student writes lack of funds, shortage of staff, corruption, infrastructure, bad. That is the bad thing. Generic, lazy, weak. Every single copy in the country says the exact same thing. To score a 6 or 7 out of 10, you must present the delivery architecture. Your opening must instantly redefine the problem. The deficit in India's public service delivery is constrained not merely by fiscal allocations, but by systemic institutional bottlenecks and a weak grassroots capacity. This should be the opening. Then you break the body of the answer into clear structural frictional layers, macro level friction, delays in the devolution of central funds to state departments. Then meso level friction, bureaucracy driven, rigid guidelines that refuse to adapt to local realities, like mandating digital OTPs in a village with a geo network coverage. You understand the phenomena. Meso level friction like this, bureaucracy driven rigid guidelines that refuse to adapt to local realities, like mandating digital OTPs in a village with zero network coverage. How it is possible? Without network coverage, how it is digital OTPs possible? Then comes to the micro level friction. This should be the last mile delivery failures ranging from last mile delivery failures. Those are ranging from complete lack of digital literacy to non-existent grievance redressal mechanism. This is an administrative diagnosis. That is how a future civil servant views a policy block. I'm repeating micro level friction again. Last mile delivery failures, I am talking about micro level friction under the micro level friction. Last mile delivery failures, what? Ranging from complete lack of digital literacy to non-existent grievance redressal mechanisms. Lack of digital literacy and non-existent grievance redressal mechanism. That is an administrative diagnosis. That is how a future civil servant views a policy block. This is the delivery architecture of an answer. That is opening, or introduction, then body, then closure. That is also called as conclusion. Then comes to the invisible factors, that is social capital versus state failure. Because the formal machinery of the state consistently fails at the last mile. Look at what UPSC tests year after year. Here is the biggest secret in the GS2 syllabus. When the formal machinery fails, who steps in? Who steps in? The invisible actors. Who are the invisible actors? NGOs and self-help groups, non-government organizations and self-help groups. The invisible actors, civil society also. Most students treat these as filler topics at the end of the syllabus, but they are not. They read a few definitions and move on. But inside secret is UPSC views these non-state actors as delivery multipliers. When a PYQ asks you about self-help groups, the examiner is not asking you to define an SHG. They are asking a deeper structural question like this: how does microfinance step in to solve macro poverty where commercial banks failed? Like these type of questions. They are asking how does localized social capital systematically replace the state execution failures? That is what UPSC is asking. What should be the preparation implications for 2026? How you are going to prepare for 2026 mains as far as invisible factors? Those are NGOs, SHG, civil society, etc. Do not study NGOs, SHG, and charities in structural isolation. Study them explicitly as the missing execution bridge between a top down state policy and a real world citizen realization. When you understand the UPSC GS2 syllabus, UPSC syllabus, as far as particularly GS2 paper syllabus is concerned, you have to understand the pattern: govern constitution, then federalism, then parliament, then civil society, then NGOs, SHG. You have to understand the pattern: social justice and governance. This is the pattern evaluation. Then how you can write the answer? How you can prepare for GS2 paper 2026? Then how you have to answer the particular question in a good structured manner with scoring decent 6 to 7 marks for 10 markers question. For that, the Metis IAS called the Metis execution rule for GS2. That is, for that, let us pull the entire blueprint together. 13 years of GS2 papers leave an unmistakable footprint. The ultimate DNA of a top ranking answer is simple: it never stops at information, it always forces the transition to implication. If the question is polity, you must expose the constitutional tension. If the question is governance, you must map the delivery friction. If the question is international relations, You must target the strategic calculation. Do not write like an activist complaining about how broken the system is. Do not write like a journalist reporting the daily headlines. Write like an administrator who has been handed a broken machine, who can look past the noise, identify the structural flaw, and propose a precise institutional repair. The syllabus tells you what to read. These 13 years PYQs from 2013 to 2025 PYQs tells you exactly how to think. The students who will successfully clear mains 2026 are not the ones sitting on hard drives overflowing with current affairs PDFs. They are the ones who have mastered the pattern, cracked the examiner's mind, and executed the architecture with absolute clinical precision. Stop compiling data blindly. Stop compiling data blindly. Don't overflow with PDFs. Start decoding the structural pattern. Start decoding the structural pattern. This is Metis IAS. We will see you in part 3 international relations.